Presiding a parish community. This is the topic of my speech, which I will articulate in 3 steps. In the first one, I will try to show how the question of the presidency of a Christian community is strongly linked to a certain understanding of the identity of the ordained ministry, reread in an essentially ecclesiological perspective. In the second step, I will go deeper into the topic of the president's authority, trying to highlight the nature of this authority, but also the ways in which it should be exercised. And finally, in the third phase, I will try to say how the service of the presidency in a synodal church perspective calls for the overcoming of that multi-secular ministerial monopoly of the pastor in favor of an activation of the charismatic and ministerial richness of those who can participate in the ministry of one, in this case of the pastor. I'm going to take the first step. The presidency of a community, in this case the parish, has to do radically with the identity of the ordained ministry, in this case of the priest. And this aspect should be well considered because it finds its foundation in that transition that took place between the Council of Trent and Vatican II, from a cultural vision of priesthood dependent and rooted in the relationship with the Eucharist, considered in its sacrificial value, to a vision that reads the ordained ministry, therefore no longer only the priesthood, in an essentially relational dynamic with respect to what are the 3 degrees of the order, the episcopate, the priesthood, and the diaconate, and the whole people of God, which is a people of the baptized, fully characterized as a priestly people, all participating in the priesthood of Christ, with the difference that, if in it all participate in the baptismal priesthood, only a few are called to exercise the ministerial priesthood, which, however, is the function of the whole people of God. What was special about the Tridentine vision of the priesthood? It must be said that this vision was linked to an essentially sacred reading of the priest's ministry, which made him a kind of intermediary between God and other believers. And the imposition of this cultic vision has led to conceiving the priesthood no longer as a service to the Christian community, but as a reality defined in itself, defined by the power to consecrate bread and wine, so detached from any essential relationship with the community. When this vision became radicalized into a sacral perspective, it came to separate the priest in his specificity from other Christians, also decreeing a clear superiority by virtue of the power of order. With the ecclesiological vision mature during the Second Vatican Council, the Church is conceived as a mystery that is realized in history and that is realized in the form of the people of God, whose subjects are all endowed with equal filial and fraternal dignity. It follows that ordained ministers cannot be seen in the order of superiority over other Christians, but rather in a dimension of service to them and to the whole Church. And so, according to this perspective, the identity of the ordained minister and what we are interested in here is that the priest is no longer an exclusive identity or an egocentric identity, but it is an essentially relational communicative identity, precisely because it is situated within and in function of the holy people of God. In this context, the ordained ministry must be understood as an essential service in favor of the whole ecclesial subject, because it is rooted in what is the apostolic memory, and this through the exercise of the triple munus. In this way, then, we understand how the proclamation of the word and governance serve to keep it rooted. The Church, in apostolic witness, is precisely where a service to the presidency of the community is situated. So we cannot imagine a presidency of the Eucharist that does not have some intrinsic connection with the presidency of the community, which certainly comes from the Eucharistic celebration. And yet, this presidency is a service so that no dimension of the Church takes a different path from the one handed down to us by apostolic memory. This also explains why it is not possible to imagine areas of ecclesial life that are separate from the service of the priestly presidency. And here, if we refer to the conciliar lesson of Vatican II, we can find a confirmation of what we are saying. Hence, the reference to the description of the role of the pastor within the decree Christus Dominus in number 30. This text describes, first of all, the role of the parish priests, starting from the relationships that define his figure and his service. Therefore, the relationship with the bishop, the relationship with the other priests, with the faithful, with the lay pastoral collaborators, with the parish vicars. So, first of all, a description and a relational perspective. But also in that number 30 of Christus Dominus, the functions, the tasks that are proper to the cura animarum are described. He is the shepherd of a community that has been entrusted to him. On a superficial reading of this text of Christus Dominus, number 11, one would say that nothing has changed in Vatican II with respect to what was the Tridental vision of the parish priest's ministry, especially in reference to the question of cura animarum. However, if we read the text with special attention, we realize that it is not simply a repetition of the lesson of Trent, because we find in that text some interesting novelties. What's new? First of all, an essential reference to the fact that the proclamation of the Word of God to all the faithful is the beginning of the ecclesial dynamic. The proclamation of the Word of God as a task that concerns those who preside over the community is, first of all, a reality that makes the Church. It is a reality that generates an ecclesial dynamic. This is an extremely interesting element. To this we add others, for example, the very close connection between community life and liturgy, to the point that liturgy, as Sacrosanctum Concilium also tells us, is a manifestation and realization of community life itself, especially in the Eucharist. And then in that issue, number 30 of Christus Dominus, we find some reference to the subjectivity of the laity and the fact that the parish is situated within a broader horizon, which is that of the local church. These are new elements that should not be overlooked. At the same time, however, we must also say that the text of Christus Dominus number 30, in fact, still holds to a reading of community life strongly centered on the pastor, that is, on the role of the one who assumes all the power, directs and makes decisions in the community, if the relationship with the bishop is obviously safeguarded. I believe that this text from Christus Dominus number 30 can be taken as a starting point to grasp in an evolutionary way how the service of presiding over a parish community, while safeguarding what is specific to priestly ministry, needs to be rethought in a perspective of synodality and co-responsibility, that is, as a ministry situated within a relational network that is composed of subjects who participate in their own way in the ministry of the one they preside over. From this point of view, this passage can be understood by rereading the nature and forms of the exercise of authority proper to the ordained ministry. And in our case, a parish priest presiding over a parish community. That brings me to the second part of my speech, which is the issue of the speaker's authority. The parish priest, as a pastor of the community entrusted to him, in fact, he is invested with authority with the functions of presidency, leadership, and governance. We cannot but affirm that the crisis that characterizes all institutional authorities does not spare even the pastoral crisis linked to the ordained ministry, and therefore demands a rethinking of the function and exercise. I think it's a matter of purifying the meaning and practice of authority in the Church from so many forms of ambiguity that somehow derive from a rather easy assimilation with the authorities of mundane institutions. Never before would the word of Jesus be as valid as in this case. It will not be among you. And so that it is not so obvious that the authority we're talking about cannot be assimilated either to that of absolute sovereigns, with which in the past it has unfortunately been sociologically identified, or to that of an authority that is simply delegated democratically and dependent on the opinion of majorities that vary, that change. To understand the difference indicated by the Gospel in reference to the nature of authority among the disciples of Jesus, reference should be made to the communion vision of the Church, in which the baptized and the ministers are characterized first and foremost by the same obedience to the Gospel and through it to Christ. So, if there is an underlying reason that motivates the service of pastoral authority, it is that it is a function of this common obedience to the Lord. And this service can only be exercised and accepted in an experience of communion, faith, and love for Christ, as well as in a common commitment to discipleship. In other words, only in the light of faith can we understand the function and proper use of authority in the Church. Knowing how to discern with concrete forms are appropriate versus those that are not or may even be inappropriate. I can give a couple of examples of this that show in an inappropriate interpretation of authority in the Church. The first reference might be to the way authority is read in a parental sense, definitely not a form that we can recognize as adequate. That is, the old form of the patriarchal family father who rules with unquestioned authority, perhaps claiming the reason for his authority and therefore the richness of experience that would authorize him to such relationship. On the other hand, the second example may not be suitable, even that more modern form that interprets the figure of the priest as leader of an organization that requires particular skills and behaviors to achieve the objectives of the organization and therefore to be able to make decisions in accordance with the means and ends, knowing how to allocate resources, knowing how to give directions, knowing how to motivate subordinate personnel, knowing how to assign tasks. All this within a pragmatic utilitarian vision of the world, simply, that is, oriented to the achievement of objectives, and therefore a vision of the leader as manager of an organization. Of course, I don't mean in this context to demonize the possibility of drawing on some useful leadership models to read the service of authority in the Church. Absolutely not. I rather believe that the uniqueness of that organization, which is the Church, should be safeguarded without distorting its objectives by simply adapting the organizational models of other realities, even if they are structured as an organization. For this reason, I believe that the traits proper to the nature and exercise of pastoral authority, in our case of those who preside over a parish community, can emerge well if we work elaborating meanings from, I would say, from the very etymology of the word authority. And so, the word authoritas calls into question the one who is auctor, that is, the one who promotes the one who first produces some activity, the one who answers for himself with his word. By this, his action, he is able to bring about change, to create something. According to these meanings, authority has to do with the process of generating, of bringing into existence, of making others grow, making them in turn authors in the first person. And so, unlike the leader who is focused on organizing and achieving goals, instead, the author is focused on caring, on growing the subject so that they in turn can become responsible authorities. And it seems to me that Jesus' authority goes precisely in this direction. Then the authority of the presiding community can find a very appropriate meaning in this model of Jesus' authority, if only for the fact that it would be aimed at putting people in touch with the authority of Jesus' words and deeds. And so, this model of authority finds its concreteness in the practice of the evangelical virtues of the Good Shepherd spoken in the Gospel. This brings me to the third point of this intervention, which I would summarize with this assumption. Those who preside over a parish community do not have to do everything. I find very interesting and also appropriate for our topic an exemplification that a Belgian canonist, Alphonse Barras, makes in one of his contributions on the different models of interpretation of the task of presiding over a community. He says that it is in the first place the priest, that is, the pastor, who does everything or almost everything. And here we have a monopolistic behavior. The motivations or reasons for this attitude can be many, perhaps the education received, the priestly spirituality, the sense of sacrifice, a kind of perfectionism, a lack of confidence. Then there is a second type of priest and parish priest who allows us to do everything or almost everything without compromising in the least. And here we are at the level of resignation, often for no reason at all. Probably in the background, here is a crisis of the ordained ministry itself and those who interpret it. So there is a crisis that is realized in a delegation. Then there is also the priest who makes it happen without even committing himself. And here is a variant of the previous attitude in which the priest acts a little bit as if he were the last of the Mohicans. The priesthood no longer has a future, and therefore the priest wants to prepare the laity to replace him, to replace it. This is not so much a resignation as it is a real flight forward. And then there is the priest who does together, that is, literally collaborates, that is, works with his community, cooperates with the other baptized, his brothers and sisters in the faith, according to the diversity of charisms, vocations, ministry tasks, and according to the specificity of his own ministry of presidency. And here the pastor articulates his ministry with the diversity of ministries, especially with the diaconate, but also with the other ministries entrusted to the laity. Well, it seems to me that this model could have a future. That's why I repeat, the pastor doesn't have to do everything. The pastor can do everything because he can. He doesn't have the possibility or the ability. Besides, as we said, this is not his responsibility for two reasons. On the one hand, he must respect baptismal co-responsibility, and on the other hand, he must honor the ministerial collaboration of some. That is why the pastor makes sure that each one does everything according to their own condition, not accepting that they want to do everything. In this sense, those who preside over a parish community certainly have the ultimate responsibility for pastoral decisions, but this must be sought and elaborated as the most just and fitted, within an effective involvement of the whole parish, reflected, for example, in the pastoral council, the place where it should be exercised according to its most authentic meaning, the art of counseling, which is the proper way for the baptized to participate in a decisive way in the maturation of the decision. In this regard, it will be necessary to ensure that no parish community lacks these bodies, which should function not as a sounding board for decisions already taken elsewhere, perhaps by the pastor, perhaps by a small group of his collaborators, but as a place of discernment, of the exercise of the sensus fidei, fidelium, or consensus building. What is at stake, obviously, is the rethinking of the organization of a parish life and everything, the relationship between ordained ministers and the laity, a rethinking that has become urgent in these times. The ongoing synodal process could be a providential way to put a serious and unanimous hand to this long-awaited renewal.